everybody, it's Jean here. This is part 2 of my Aztec, Indian, whatever it is, quilt that I've made. This is part 2 of the tutorial. You can see part 1 with my friend Columba, who's visiting from Italy. That's a previous video. I've cut it into 2 parts because it was a little bit long. Very simple quilt to make. No, there's not one single bit of curved seams, just all straight seams and a bit of blanket stitching on this quilt. Very, very simple quilt. But I show you my process in selecting the colors and the fabric. So I hope you enjoy this. Again, this is part 2 of my Indian quilts, my American Indian looking quilt. Okay, thanks everybody. Bye. See ya. Bye. Here's my quilt so far laid out sideways. Now I want to have some relief on the sides around my quilt. It's a bit too dark and it's a bit too much. I want to lighten it up. So what I've pulled from my stash, I've pulled this. Let me see if that's it. I've pulled this sort of a pale golden peachy apricot, small, like a tone on tone print. But I think this pulls out the golden yellows of these different patterns here. There's enough yellow in the quilt that I can just add a little bit of relief to the sides. Oh, I don't know if I have enough of this quilt. Oh, geez, I only have that piece. I thought it was full. I thought it was in. Oh. Let me just see. What I think I'm going to do is I'm just going to worry about my side borders for now. Because I don't know if I have enough to make the top border. I think I will. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to probably, actually, I'll show you what I'm going to do. I'm going to use, as you know, I don't often use gadgets and gizmos, but I did get this. I have them all. I did get this. It's called it's stuck on there. A Tri-Rex triangular ruler. Ugh. Oh yeah, it's stuck with that gluey stuff. I haven't used it before, obviously. So I'll pull that glue thing off. Ugh. Now, I've done this before when I was making this quilt. I didn't use this ruler though. I have another one. Hopefully this will be this right size. Oh, you can make the different size triangles. Okay, I don't know if you can see this. Let me put it on here. It's called a Tri-Rex ruler, and it's by Easy Quilting, Darlene Zimmerman. It's just a triangular ruler. That's it. So I'm going to slice off from this about a 6-inch, I would say a 6-inch wide piece. Because I'm going to, let me see if you can see here what I'm doing. I'm going to be adding with this fabric here, stick with me folks, there's not a lot here either. I've used this before. I'm going to be cutting out, it'll make sense. I'm going to be cutting out with my ruler, yeah, that ruler there. I'm going to be cutting out images of this fabric here, triangle pieces. Now what I'm doing is I'm so totally cheating. I don't want to do any piecing on this quilt. I don't mind doing a raw edge or a blanket stitch, which I'm going to be doing. I'm going to be doing a thick black blanket stitch, which will look like, you know, woven rug type stuff. But what I'm going to be doing is I'm going to be isolating with this ruler, perhaps 5.5 inches to that point there. There's a 5.5 inch triangle. I'm going to be isolating the image. Everyone is going to be exactly the same on this fabric here. I don't know, oops, there's that gluey stuff again. Ugh. So I'll cut my border about 6 inches, and then I'll cut some images out about 5.5 inches, like fussy cutting my images. I think I want them all the same. And what I'm going to do is those triangles are going to be on on the outside of this border here, and if you can just follow along with me, I'll show you what I'm going to be doing. So I'm going to take this rule and I'm going to be fussy cutting a 5.5 inch bottom up to here diamond, no, triangular shape that I'm going to then sew onto my side borders. I'm not worried yet about my top borders. I want to make this a little bit wider and then I'll go from there. So I'll show you how, well, I might as well do it now. So there's that, get that out of my way. So here we go. I want to be, so there's my 5.5 inch line. So I need to straighten this up here. So I'm going to do that. I'm going to actually use my Fiskars ruler to do that. I'm going to slice this up here. So my design, so what I'm trying to achieve is my entire design is completely straight. So you see that. So then I'm going to use this little handy dandy rotary cutter from Martelli. I'm going to start at the 5.5 inch, and I like that pattern right there. So I'm going to eyeball it really nice and symmetrical. Obviously I'm going to have a seam allowance. Excuse me, my hands. Ah, geez. I got to turn this and everything. Anyway, you get the idea of what I'm going to be doing. And I'll show you. I'm not a great cutter. 5.5 inch there. I'm sure there's an easier way to do this. And then go down there. I like this Martelli cutter. You just put your hand there. So there, oops, didn't cut. My fault. So click it off. Now I'm going to be making a ton of these, or maybe 10 of them, maybe 8. I'll see how it goes. And then on a 6 inch border, about like that, maybe a little bit wider, I'm going to blanket stitch this on, right up the side of the quilt. Do you get that? I don't have any curved piecing. I'm just going to blanket stitch that on, go to the edge, with a nice thick black blanket stitch. Now I will have to get my other little machine out because my Juki is only a straight stitch machine. So I'm going to continue cutting these. I'm going to put these on. I may put my borders on first and then applique this on. If I do that, I'll show you my next step. So if you're confused already, don't worry. It'll get there in the end, folks. So as you can see, I have sewn this sort of a pale peachy, I see sort of a sunset, sunrise like looking fabric to the side. I only have, now as you can see, I've only done 2 side borders. I've done the long edges of my quilt here. I'm not worried yet about the top. Because I ran out of fabric. I only have this much left. I ripped 3 pieces this long, sewed them together to make the length up. Now what I have to do is I just have to, I've not really measured anything, but I do know everything is pretty square because my 11 inch squares were really nice and square. Let me just see if I'm in the frame here. And so now I'm just going to line up my ruler here with this edge, which I know is square, because I just sort of sliced that off. And then that was a selvage I did. This one here was a selvage. So I'll just line that up. That's nice and straight on my board. And I'll just slice that off. Oops. And so my edges are nice and my top and bottom are nice and straight. And I'll neaten up the edges here also of my quilt. Making all nice and square. Again, I don't, you know now, if you're following along, I don't know measurements. I just sort of, you know, cut and make everything fit. So you know me. If you want precise measurements, you got to go elsewhere. Mine end up okay. So I'm lining that up there, lining it up here, slicing that off. Now again, I'm not worried. I'm not worried about at this point, I'm not worried about my top borders. What I have done is, excuse me again, I have cut out 10 of these images. Remember my triangles here, because that's all I could get out of that fabric. I do have a little bit more fabric left over, but it's in bits and pieces now. So it's all in bits and pieces. I could have done the sort of the mirror image, but I didn't do that. I had enough to cut out 5 here of these triangles. Now, because that peachy yellow is too stark, I have to add some interest, right? So this is the interest I'm adding. So I'm going to, this is it basically. I'm going to put 5 of these. I'll space them properly. They're cut exactly the same with my ruler. I'm going to put 5 of these down the side. So however, when I space them, you get the picture. I'm going to put 5 of them perfectly down the side here. So I'll eyeball it and I will measure it. Let me just see. Yeah, so you can see what I'm doing here. I'll eyeball it, this, and I'll measure it. I'll come to the center of my quilt. You can see what I'm doing. So I'm going to do that on both sides, adding a little bit of interest to my border. And now, when I do, I'll do it exactly the same on each side. And again, I'm not worried about my top and bottom border. I'm not worried. Because I ran out of fabric. I'll cross the bridge when I come to it to make my border longer. But it's already long, so I wanted to make it at this point wider. Now, what I am going to do, these are my 5 pieces for my other side. What I'm going to do is I will pin these on or glue them on, and then very carefully, it doesn't go right up to the top, but I wanted that. This is in the seam allowance here. I'll measure carefully where these triangles are to go, and then I will get out my machine and I'll do a nice thick black wide blanket stitch. I have to get out my other machine, and I will blanket stitch these on. Now, looking at this, you can see I could have done a pieced border, right? But then I would have had all of these funky pieces with the with the seam allowance and this and all. So I get the look of a pieced border with just cutting out some triangles and appliquing them on. Now, if I want to just go back and show you, I've done about 2, 4, 6, 8, 10, 12, 14, 15, 16, 17, 18, 19, 20. I've done about 20 seams so far on this quilt. 20. That's it. 20 straight seams. And look at the size quilt I'm getting. And look at the interest I'm getting. And it's so easy. It looks complicated. Like, oh my word. It's not. Bunch of 10-inch squares, a little border, another border, and some triangles cut out. You would need to get a triangular ruler, but like that's okay. That's cool to have. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to set up my machine, my Husqvarna, and I'm going to do a nice thick black blanket stitch, and then on both sides, and then I'll figure out what I'm going to do on the top and bottom. I'm at my machine, and Maxwell is going to be videotaping me. I just want to show you my progress so far. If you remember, I said I was going to measure my triangles that I'm putting on. I didn't have to measure it. I have 5 triangles. I had 5 blocks, so I just went into the middle of each block. I was making it a bit more difficult. And so they're right in the middle. The point here, or the squared off end, is right in the middle of my 5 blocks. Now I'm coming around. I've already done this part. I've already done these with this heavy, nice blanket stitch. I'm using black thread, and each one of these is exactly the same motif. You saw me cut them out. Now I've just pinned them, and I'll just show you. I pin them. I'm doing the other side. I have my new machine, not a new machine. I have my Husqvarna Sapphire. This machine here, which this has a lovely blanket stitch on. My Juki doesn't. And I'll just put my presser foot down, and I'm going on the side. I'm doing a nice big blanket stitch. I'm going on the side of that. My needle's riding right along the side of this applique. It's a fairly wide blanket stitch. I want you to be able to see this blanket stitch, as I said, to make it look like a stitched weaving on this one border. My machine has a needle down and presser foot up feature, so I don't have to mess with it. I just go up to the top there. Now I'm just holding this down, sort of pulling it behind. Just finish that up. This machine, the stitch quality is really quite nice on this machine. I'm actually using a black top thread, and I'm using a white bottom thread, but it looks very nice, my stitch. So I'll just finish up doing these, and then if you remember, I'm going to decide what I'm going to do on my top border. I might pull out one of those stripes that I was showing you in the beginning. I'm not bothered that the sides borders and the top border at this point don't really match. I don't know what size this quilt will end up. It just is growing as I'm working on it. I will put, it looks like I'll put maybe a blue to bring out again a bit more blue along this edge, and then keep adding, I'll probably just keep adding some borders, but I'll show you that when I get to it. I have finished sewing my triangles on, and I like this look. I blanket stitched them on, and as I was saying, they're all just right across the 5 blocks. So again, this is just a smallish quilt. It's or as of now, it's just a small quilt. But if we just go back, you can see the look I'm hoping to achieve. It's hanging down over that edge too. But you see what I'm saying? It's sort of like an Indian looking thing, whatever. Now, I have to figure out what I'm going to be putting on this top border. And I found this piece. Let me just try to keep this as still as possible. I found this piece of fabric here. I've used this before. I save all my striped fabrics. I saved all my striped fabrics. And it's just a long piece, perhaps about 7 foot long, 6-7 foot long, of this bare, obviously an Indian looking piece of fabric. Now I sort of just auditioned this top of my quilt here. Trying to Maxwell left. I'm trying to do this with one hand. And I like just this piece here. Get rid of that. I like this piece here. I like that right there, without that on there. So I think, and I just want a little one. I just want a little piece. Now that looks beautiful. You're like, oh, you could use the whole bear and have that as. But I just want a small bit. Let me see if I can get rid of this here and just show you what I mean. I'm going to just slice off this bit. So it'll just look like that. If you can see that. Just at the top and the bottom. Yeah. I'm still staying with the gold, the turquoise, and the rust in this quilt. And I like the idea that I didn't use that black. It would have been a bit, just a slightly glaring. These are truly earth and sky tones and jewel tones in this quilt here. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to slice off. I'm just going to slice off a bit. And then of course I will save, yet for another project, I will save this bear stripe here. I can utilize that on another project, or maybe this project. I will see how it goes. But for now, I'm just going to use that little bit right there. I'm going to keep that turquoise. I may turn it around because this will be in the seam allowance here, this little bit. So I want to sort of save that next to the rust. So I'll show you when I'm done. I've sewn my top border onto my quilt there, my quilt top. And if you notice, I salvaged a bit of this border. Even though the design is cut off, I'm okay with that. I'm quite all right with that. For the side border, the top is just slightly wider than the side, or I should say the sides are slightly wider than the top, but I want that. I want it to equal out the body of my quilt being wider because it's longer and narrower now. So you can see this image here of my border, just my stripe. And I'll pull away. There's my quilt top so far. And I'm looking at it and I'm wanting to add, at this point, as I said, a nice bit of blue. A nice bit of blue around the edges. Now I have to see what stripes I have, what border fabric I have, and that might just be it. That might literally just be it for my quilt top. It's just a throw size. So I'll go check my fabric selection and tell you what I'm doing. I didn't on the bottom here. I didn't like miter the corners. I just, if you can see, I just put that down there. Didn't miter anything. Didn't mess. Very, very, very simple quilt. I let my fabric do the work. I let very easy applique do the work. I think I told you before, when I do an applique, I keep the backing, I keep the fabric on the back. I do not cut away my applique. Makes a heavier quilt, which I quite like. So there's my quilt top so far. I may or may not have to stop filming because this is going to be too long, and I might have to cut this in two. I'm not quite sure. I'll see how it goes. But here's my quilt top. So I'll keep going and I'll let you know how it progresses. I've sewn on those side borders, and this is where I am with my quilt, and I think I'm going to finish it here. This is very simple quilt. I have completely let the fabric do the work. As you can see, I have just sewn on this side border, and it goes from here out to there. I had about 3 yards. That's what you need, and it's a striped fabric. You don't use, it has about 6 of these stripes, the large wide stripes. So I only cut 4 out of the length. I've not sewn the top on, and I've not sewn this side on. Now you might be saying, well, that's black. That's the black that perhaps you didn't want in the earlier fabric selection. But as I look at this quilt, I have to sew this edge on and that top edge too in the bottom. As I look at the quilt, I feel it needed a frame, and I just thought it needed a darker frame. And it did have, this fabric is pulling from that Native American tribal look. So I don't know if we can see the whole beauty of it as it is here, but that's what I've used. So making this border here wider, I've made the quilt top wider, but I end up with the same size border going around. Now, I'm not going to show you how I do it. I'll leave that for another tutorial. I'm going to miter this corner here. That's a whole nother tutorial. I'm quilting my Native American quilt here. I'm coming up to the finishing part, and it's very simple quilting. This is a very simple quilt. This is the whole point of this quilt. I've just done sort of squares, about a 2-inch square, just quilting stitches straight. And then on this part of my quilt, I've decided to do a just sort of copy the triangles that you saw that I stitched on there. And I've done it in, if you can see this, I've done it in it's like a gold thread, and then I've done it in a blue, like a turquoise. Can't really see it. Just adds a little bit of interest to this border here. So that's what I'm doing. I'm going to be finishing up quilting this side here. And then it's very simple. I'll just quilt straight lines all the way through my quilt. And then I'll just get through the border. Just straight lines. I'm not going to be doing anything fancy on the edges here. And then my quilt is done. Oh, there's my backing. Real pretty bright orange. Had this hanging around. I believe that was, who's this connecting threads? I forget, I don't know who this is from. No, Spring Branch. Marcolina Medallions, Spring Made fabric, Spring Creatives Products Group. That's pretty fabric. I believe I got that on clearance. When I see a clearance in any of the fabric online stores, I'll get 6 or 7 yards for backing, and this is one I got, so I pulled it for this quilt. It's pretty. I like it. So yeah, I'm almost done. I'm almost done quilting it. Completely straight stitches, just lines, I should say. The whole entire quilt, straight line stitching, and it goes with the actual angular parts of the native Indian design. So I like it.